Hi, everybody. I'm Allan Marks, working with Sean and the team at Sideporch. And a year ago at Climate Week, we presented, and I'm just thrilled to see the people coming out for our second LA Climate Week presentation and discussion. We want to keep it practical. I'm going to throw out some statistics. 150,000 people evacuated from the LA fires. Over 30 people died. 17,000 or so structures damaged. And the thing about statistics, we hear numbers and we forget that they reflect real people. And that's why today we've woven in so many people who have stories, some of them on this panel, that they'll share with you. But in the context of justifying the optimism that's needed to recover and rebuild differently than has been done in other disasters. Also, I want to start out at the beginning before I introduce the panel and leave one thought with you as we think about this. Often we talk about wildfires and wildfire risk, and I think if we look at the Northland data, obviously there are distinctions between people's attitudes towards climate change generally and what they think about wildfires. These were urban fires. They destroyed urban areas. The ignition happened to be in adjacent wildfire, but I live in the middle of the city, and if somebody had fallen asleep in bed with a cigarette, lit their house on fire with 100-mile-an-hour winds, I assure you my neighborhood would have been every bit as vulnerable as if I lived in Altadena or Palisades. So we all have a stake in making sure that how we rebuild and how we recover is in ways that are not just resilient for those neighborhoods, but that set a model for how we can improve our urban environments more widely. So keep that in mind. On our panel today, we have Drew Flandin, who's a real estate developer with GCI companies. We have Abby Ross. She's going to talk to us a bit about insurance and risk and other things in a moment. She's the CEO and founder of Resiliency company. We have Brad Sawyer. We talk about insurance and insurability, and it's critical. Brad is with Marsh. Marsh McLennan is a huge insurance broker and advisor nationally. And the way you make things insurable is by reducing the actual risk. So we're going to talk a bit about that and how that's key to financing and financeability as well. Nuin-Tara Key on the far end is with California Forward, where she's headed their programs and has a background in insurance and in government service. Lots of good things that we'll bring together today. Next to her is Becky Feldman. Becky is Chief of Staff here in Los Angeles with the U.S. Green Building Council of California, and talk in more detail about building materials and building design, how that works. And Ryan Keeter, closest to me on this side, he knows how to build things. He's the West Division leader for Gilbane Builders, one of the largest construction companies in the country. So I'm going to get right to it and actually start Nuin-Tara with you, if I could, to talk about the nature of risk. What is the risk that we're currently facing that we have to solve for?
Yeah, Susan. Okay, great. Well, first, I just want to thank you all for the invitation to be here. It's wonderful to be joining you today and on this panel. So, as mentioned, just for those who don't know, California Forward is a statewide nonprofit. We work at the intersection of climate and the economy, really looking at how we drive an economic agenda that is regions up, that reflects the regional diversity across the state of our economies and communities, but also really couples climate as a core macro and microeconomic issue that needs to be central to everything we do across our economy. So just for context, I think your question around kind of what risks we face, I'm going to start at a high level. I know we have a lot that we'll get into here across with the panel. But I think one of the things that is central to how we're thinking about how do we manage climate risk and changing climate risk really starts with an understanding of who holds that risk across our kind of value chain, across the economy and across communities, and then really unpacking what are the solutions and how do we better align those actors across our economy. So one of the key things that I think is important to understand, for example, is kind of over what time frames different actors are holding risk. We will talk a lot about insurance. Insurance typically holds risk for 1 year. Then you have tenants and renters. On average in the US, a renter-tenant usually is in a property for 3 years. They're holding risk for a certain amount of time, slightly longer than insurance. But then you have homeowners, which typically across the US are in a home for an average of 8 years. You have the mortgage lenders and the financial providers there, who typically, again, are holding a loan for about 13 years on average, even though the time frame may be 30. And I think central to our conversation around risk and managing risk is recognizing that government holds risks forever. So they can't move around, hopefully, and if they are not holding the risk, it's bigger issues going on. But I think
we
that
might
is
have bigger issues.
yeah, we might have bigger issues. Yeah, that's for another day. But the government holds risks forever. And I think as we're thinking about how we manage the risk we're facing, we need to be thinking and really focusing on finding resilient solutions that reduce our risk to the current and future climate risk that aren't inadvertently just moving those risks to the public balance sheet and ultimately to individuals who live in communities. And that is the thing that is really a focus for us in California Forward. And I think as we're going through the conversation here today, what that means is we need to be making strategic investments to actually reduce underlying risk. So you think of kind of a generic risk bell curve. We have to reduce the top of that bell curve by making strategic sustained investment in resilience. And one quick side there, which is on my soapbox here, is that requires moving away from where I think we've been in the field of adaptation and resilience generally, which is looking at one-time grant funding as our pathway to do that. That is not going to be how we actually build resilience, so that's something we can talk about. And then we will always have risk. I think that's also part of the reality of our world. So how do we make sure we have the right financing and access to capital to manage the tails of that risk curve, right? And that when risks happen, we have the right resources on hand and we can align economic actors to do that, to manage those risks and make sure that we can rebuild or can sustain resilience in communities. So I'll stop there. Lots to share as we continue.
That's great, Nuin-Tara. Thank you very much. I want to turn to Abby next because some of the themes you brought up around risk reduction, and then how that also then ties to insurability and how to close that gap of a project that you're working on very closely. Abby, tell us your thoughts.
Thanks so much. Great framing about where the risk lies. My name is Abby Ross. I'm the CEO of the Resiliency company. And we were founded to help humanity adapt to a climate reality that has wildfires, floods, hurricanes, extreme heat drought. After the fires here in LA, we being named the Resiliency company, wanted to figure out what is the opportunity to help survivors think about resiliency as a decision to be made throughout the rebuilding process. So we started interviewing folks in insurance around the challenges of insurance. What is insurability? What does it look like to come back to a market that is rebuilding in an area that is deemed risky from insurers? And we recognize that the incentives were aligned. People want to stay in community, actively want to build with resilience and de-risk homes and areas. Insurers included, homeowners, city governments, mortgage lenders, all of these stakeholders are aligned around resilience, but one of the gaps is, well, how do you pay for it? I think of resilience and adaptation is ultimately everyone's problem, but whose job is it? That question, with the shared risk makes it really challenging. So we've created the Resilient LA Delta Fund. That fund is going to be a series of grants, but also loans to help every homeowner build to an insurable standard. So what we've realized is that we actually know how to engineer solutions to be safer from fire. Building materials, defensible space, resiliency is a decision. How do we help homeowners make that decision by overcoming financing? So in the rebuilding process, insurance will pay to build what was there before. But we know that's not good enough to protect from risk. So the difference is an insurable standard created by an organization called the Institute for Building Home and Safety. So a bunch of really smart engineers light things on fire or put high winds to figure out what material holds up against severe perils. They created the Wildfire Prepare Plus standard, and it's a series of things that homeowners can do. So we want to make sure that homeowners have access to funds to be able to build to that safe, insurable standard at the clip of every home that we build here. Rebuild after the fire. That gives the springboard and ultimately one of the proof cases to have insurers act as vested stakeholders in how we de-risk communities and make this a safe and livable place.
Thank you. And Brad, I'm going to turn to you next to talk a bit about how the insurance industry then would react to these kinds of things. And I want to preface it and kind of frame it, if I may. There was a piece, I don't know if anybody heard about it last week. Allianz, the largest German insurance company, and one of their senior executives made a statement that given the nature of climate risk and its escalation over the next 10, 20 years, within maybe 20 to 30 years, 50 at most, large portions of the world's property are not going to be insurable. If that's the case, financeability, and for that matter, it's equal to capitalism, is sort of in jeopardy. It would be really nice to prevent that from happening. What does it take for the insurance industry to find? What does it take for the insurance industry to find, collaboration in ways that actually reflect the true risks that are underlying coverage?
Yeah, so I think.
No pressure, you got 2 minutes.
Yeah. No, so for 17, 18 years now, I've talked to clients in the insurance world about how to better prepare their homes to survive events, whether it's a home fire, whether it's a wildfire, whether it's a hurricane, whether it's a severe convective storm. And so I've tried to give them guidance over the years on how to prepare for this. And in the last couple of years, the term resiliency is really starting to pick up. It's something I've been doing for a long time. And it's really starting to be more impactful now. People are starting to listen now because it's affecting everyone a bit more and more. The last 5 years, I believe there's been $15 or more billion insurance-related disaster events, whether it be severe convective storm, whether it be wildfire, whether it be hurricanes that affected everyone. So it's affecting the insurance market across the country. California is clearly the worst insurance market there is right now. Across the country, we're experiencing the worst insurance market any of us have ever worked in. So right now, my focus and what I'm trying to do is education more than anything. I see such a huge educational gap with what the IBHS, like I was saying, this company is offering guidance, and they have since 2013 and before that. There's a Good Morning America piece in 2013 talking about wildfire and how embers can catch structures on fire. Wood roofs are bad, mulch is bad. But here we are 12 years later, and people still don't know that this is a problem around their home. So we just need to close that gap. We need people to understand they can update their homes, they can build homes to be more resilient. Because fire is not going anywhere. Fire is happening more frequently. Fire is happening in areas where people live, and we're still developing new neighborhoods in those areas. You look at Utah, there's a lot of new mountain communities being built within buoy areas. And we need to have people adopted how they're building their homes and around those communities to be more safe. I want to see a time where a fire is coming through and we all feel fine because we know the community has been updated, these structures have been built and retrofitted to survive this event. And I was in Palisades yesterday, and there were a lot of homes that were still standing, there were a lot of homes lost. And I was hoping to see with these homes that survived that they all had been updated to the IBHS standards and they were built to be resilient or retrofitted to be resilient, but it was about 50-50. Some of it was luck, and I'm hoping those folks that survived because of luck understand they can still update their home, make them more resilient, so the next fire that comes through, they're ready for it. Some of the homes that survived, I had one in particular that was up against some really bad brush that was resilient. It had stuff was siding, had 0 to 5 grade clearance, and ember-resistant vents in the house, and I knew when that fire came through, this had a better chance of surviving than a lot of the homes in this community. So I think education is the key piece. If you're going to live in a wildfire area, learn what your threats are, start to do some research on how you can improve your home, how you can improve the property, and then insurance carriers also need to stop just counting on models, because I get frustrated when I talk to insurance companies and tell them, I've got a great risk for you, let's look at this one. And they still say no, and they say, well, the model's 100 out of 100 on a wildfire score. I go, I understand that, but that's looking at 1,000 feet or up from space. Look at the risk when you parse it. This client has done everything they can to improve their property. In a wildfire event, their threat is embers. They cleared out the brush around their house. Embers are really the threat. They've now retrofitted their house to protect the embers. The chances of this home surviving that event are greater because of the work that they've done. So I think whether it's wildfire, whether it's severe convective storm, there are ways to improve your house that you need to look into to make them more resilient. These events aren't going away; they're getting worse, and it's going to continue. That trend's going to continue, whether that's flood, whether that's wildfire, hail, etc., tornadoes. But there's a lot of science and engineering that's happening behind the scenes. If you do your research, you can see how you can improve your house so that it can prevent or survive these events.
And I like how you segued subtly from luck to probability. Because luck is a matter of probability in these situations. We can't guarantee things, but we can certainly increase the odds of surviving.
Yeah, even the most mitigated house in the world in a conflagration event like occurred with the Palisades. Palisades fire was a wildfire for an hour. Then it became a conflagration event once it entered the community. Structures started burning. But wood fences caught homes on fire because of wicked. The fence caught fire and it led to 4, 5, 6, 7 homes catching those homes on fire. So you could still have a prepared home, but if you have a wood fence attached to it, there's your vulnerability. Or if your neighbor's house is only 6, 7 feet away from you catches fire, that heat in that house is going to compromise your home because it's very close. So homes on the edge of the community where the wildfires occur need to be the most resilient, so it prevents it from getting inside the community. The stuff inside the community still needs to be resilient too, but really that outer edge is where the homes need to be the absolute most resilient.
Yeah. So let's pivot from that to Becky, because I actually want to talk about two things. One, we'll put up your slide. Good. You can talk about some of the specific ways that building materials and design can make structures more resilient, but also the heat from this fire. I know you want to talk about that. These are unusual fires in an area where we are used to fires. I grew up in, remember fires going through Atlantic Canyon all the time. We had a fire not too long ago, but this was different in a lot of ways.
Sure, yeah. First, let me introduce USGBC California. We are an independent nonprofit that focuses broadly on sustainability in the built environment. And we do that through the lens of education, thought leadership, and community engagement. So we're really all about letting both professionals and the public know about what they can do to decarbonize their structures so that we have less carbon disasters, and also what to do in these events to support resiliency. So some of the questions you asked are from my personal lens. So my husband is a firefighter. We lived in the Palisades. We lost our home. And he was there through the entire fire. He's been a firefighter for 15 years. He's fought a lot of wildfires. He was on the Woolsey fire, saved the whole community. And so he thought, I can be here with my firehouse, save this whole neighborhood. We lived in Tahitian Terrace, the mobile home park that was right on PCH in Temescal. So a very enclosed community right near a large water source. And it was not the same as any other fire. It was 100-mile-per-hour winds, it was vertical and horizontal flames, and it was unlike everything ever. So you have a little more technical expertise on this. I'm just knowing, because this is talked about in my home a lot, but this was not something that any amount of water personnel could really have stopped. It was a really different type of event, and it's not going to be the only one of these type of events. So we have to prepare for this rides off of climate disasters that we don't even yet know about because we haven't fully experienced them. So how can we do that with a lens on how can we be more resilient? How can we give people choices in rebuilding that increase the resiliency and the longevity of those homes? Like, you have a choice right now, like we personally have a choice to rebuild our house as quickly as possible and live there, but does that mean we get to live there for 2 more years, 5 more years, before we have to do more upgrades or before another disaster? So why don't we take the time and make the choices to have a house that can last a decade, 2 decades, 50 years, because we know these things are increasing. I also live in a flood and slide area, so this is not the only emergency, and it was actually not the one we were as concerned about, right? So there's so many things going on here, and there's so many choices that people can make that they don't know. And if they personally know, but they don't have building professionals that are aligned in those choices, then they're much harder to make. I've only gone through a few home upgrades, but working with a contractor is not always the easiest thing, and they are the professionals, so if they're telling you, no, this is the way we do it, it's hard to argue with that if you're not equipped with that knowledge and expertise to say, no, this is the choice I'm making for my home so that it can be more resilient. So we worked with ERA, as our professional, as our technical support, and a lot of other experts in our wildfire advisory group to come up with this guide. Scan the QR code, please check it out. And it really offers some very basic and very clear guidelines of the choices you can make and understanding how to build more resilient, what is combustible versus non-combustible, how spacing matters, how vegetation matters, how all of these things come together, and how you can work with your neighbors in your community to increase your resilience. Because, you know, as you stated, one home can only be so fire resistant, but if it's next to, you know, a wooded area with a wooden home and a wooden fence, then nobody can really be protected. So how can we work together to reimagine these communities so that they can have the same character and same connection that we all loved in these communities we lived in, but how can they be more resilient for these types of disasters and all the other things that we're gonna face? We are constantly dealing with water issues, so how can we engineer for more water security and all these things at the same time? Like, this isn't just making more fire resilient homes, it's making communities that can face all of the things that are gonna come at us in this really challenging future.
Wonderful. You mentioned something, and you to some degree mentioned it, and I want to stress it, it's idea of community. And the idea you can make a resilient structure, but if what connects to you also gaining vegetation and living materials and so forth the same way. We talked earlier too, so that people before the pandemic mentioned permitting, streamlining permitting. We haven't really talked as much about the basic infrastructure, but we can talk about underground utilities and so forth. You've developed a lot of projects that are some of them quite large. We're sitting here in LA County, the fire in the Palisades of Los Angeles. How is it really going to play out and what we can see?
Thank you, Allan. I want to say thank you, Allan, thank you, Sean, thank you, Tara, for bringing us all together. And for those of you who watch the program, very sorry. I'm one of them, so I can be very good. So, very good question. I think it's fair to say there's a concept called a district, and I'll give you a fancier word for it. It's called the Unified Permitting Authority or the district. And they're used occasionally. We don't see them very often, but they do exist. And what it allows you is essentially a sovereign body or a quasi-sovereign body, which would allow you to build a community. It would allow you to address systemic risk. And it would also allow you to have sovereignty over how you address your infrastructure. You were talking about it, Nuin-Tara. You were talking about it. So undergrounding utilities, first and foremost, power poles were great in the day, but they're basically Roman candles. In addition, you want robust communication, like a sonic ring. Most sophisticated cities, El Segundo, Burbank have sonic rings, which are very robust internet loops that go around the city that are multiples of redundancy. So there's always communication available. Fire infrastructure. I mean, we've all heard the anecdotal stories about the Palisades with no water and fire hydrant. That's a problem for sure, but it's only the tip of the iceberg. So we would be able to address it. So how does it get funded? And the answer is, if you have a district or if you have a unified permitting authority, it would also give you taxing authority. So think of a mellow roost bond back in the day, where you'd actually be able to have an indenture of sort. And you're going to say, well, geez, Drew, have you lost your marbles against the Palisades? Yeah, but there's 7,000 properties, and I think there's 10,000 properties in Altadena. So this is a problem without reference, at least, and I'm 65, without reference in my 65 years. So it's a very different dynamic. And I also think that you have to put it in the context of a systemic, of a shift in the supply of systemic risk. Meaning, 30 years ago, we didn't think about fire the way we think about it, or natural calamities the way we do today. Whether you believe in climate change or not, that's on you. I will say the world is different today. I think you can agree with that. And you have to address a different world, and it has to be part of your mindset. So what we've been advising Supervisor Horvath and some of the council people on is how to create districts so that you have a level of autonomy. And to Allan, to your specific question about how do you go through zoning, it's a Byzantine process to say the least. And also, if you're a public servant, you a supervisor or a council person, it's very sexy to have, it's very desirable to have domain and prerogative over land use. People come and they supplicate to you, right? You have the authority to say no. And from a political perspective, that's very attractive. It's one of the things that's an attractive part of the job. With guys like me hiring all kinds of consultants to get to you. So if you take that away and streamline the process, so there's no discretionary approval as we phrase it in my business, that's a win for the public. That's a win for the private person. The other thing is if you had a district, you would have a group of professionals with institutional members, so that when you go to think of the, what's it called down in Omaha Pico, the disaster relief center. So I don't know how many of you have been there. I will give the public sector an A+. It is a fabulous, fabulous resource. You go there, you need a new license, done. You go there, you need a new passport, done. I mean, things that would take months. So this would be in the district, you go with your set of plans, you have a set of professionals, be it planning, be it zoning, be it FD, PD, whatever it is, and it's a real-time approval process. Not this, well, an appointment next week, you have to get to the inspector, you have to go to the council of the district, none of that, it's done right in there. So for the way, if I were a monarch, I would really draw a district around Altadena, I would draw a district around Palisades, I would give them some level of sovereignty so they can solve their own problems and possibly either dictate what happens to ULA funds, dictate what happens to sales revenue funds, so you can bring that capital back into the community and you can give people incentives. And the last thing I would do is I would very much take a different view of zoning. So for example, I live in the Palisades. We had a Rouse destroyed, we had Gelson's destroyed. What I would do is I would allow workforce housing above those old stores. When they get rebuilt, I would advocate for some form of affordable housing above those stores, increasing density so you can bring people, teachers, first responders, whatever it is, back into your community. And low density is not sacrosanct, right? And the last thing I would do is I would use some of the public open spaces for temp housing for contractors and subcontractors. Let me give you an example. If I've gone on too long, shut me out. Okay. If you think about it, let's say there's 6,000 parcels. Let's, for the sake of cowboy math, let's say there's 3,000 that can get rebuilt in the next 3 years. Okay. So let's assume that there's 15 tradespeople per house per day. And let's all assume that they all drive a car separately. Okay? So that's 3,000 houses by 15, that's 45,000 people per day, and if each person drives a car, that's 45,000 cars into and out of the Palisades every day. I'm not a genius, but it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that's pretty impractical. So maybe we can mitigate some of that burden by using some of the open spaces for temporary housing for employees. But in any case, the last thing I'll say to you is you can no longer rely 100% on an insurance indemnity and the public sector, as we all have done for decades. You must think about community first, as Sean said at the inception of this. Number one, you have to think about volunteerism. One of the things my wife is looking at, she works for a large nonprofit, where they are using these natural disasters to bring young people from high schools and colleges, like a Peace Corps, into these disaster areas as part of their educational process and credit process and applications process, where they get intellectual capital and for that maybe financial capital. So you have to bring the community in, we have to own it, and you can't rely on the public sector anymore, because I think it's fair to say they can't deliver.
Very good, thank you. So following up, I looked at the math about you getting all these construction workers to do at the same time, and the traffic.
There's one street.
Yeah, and the traffic on Sunset Rush Hour is fun, so.
Louder,
Can you hear me?
yeah.
Thank you. I'm just having a private conversation. But thank you all for listening. No, but seriously, I think when you do the math on this stuff, I think it's a important to recognize, I want to distinguish two things, right? There's things you should do anyway with respect to permitting reform, building material, the sort of things we've been talking about. There's also this special overlay of disaster recovery. And maybe I'll turn to Ryan, with your build thing, your construction company. It's not just labor, I mean, it's building materials. And at a time when with tariffs and supply chains and some economic uncertainty, that's already a bit disrupted. But even if it weren't, the idea of rebuilding giant areas of a big city at the same time, it's daunting. And if you look at the track record of other things, whether it's the struggles currently going on in Lahaina National or things in the past, in Colorado, things in Northern California with the Paradise Fires in Santa Rosa, we don't have the tunnel fire in 1991, I think you know this. We don't always have the best track record of recovering either quickly or wisely. And construction constraints are one of those big things. What do you think are the best practices now that we can take into account? Or the realistic constraints where we should say, no, this is not.
Yeah, thank you. Ryan Meter, division leader for Gilbane Building Companies. We're full service builder and developer throughout the country, and disaster relief services, transition planning. So, and I've got peers across the country that I'm talking to on a regular basis. And every time I talk to them, they're like, what can we do to be helping? Gilbane is one of the oldest, largest family-owned companies in the country. So we're not a slave to the market. We're not a slave to shareholders. We care, and we're looking forward to helping. 3 months ago, I know personally, as I was coming down to LA quite a bit, I was, how can we help? I'm so honored to be here in this room with people who've lost their homes, their lives have been destroyed. And what I recognize now, it's not about asking what we can do to help. It's being here at these places and rolling up our sleeves and taking those ideas and putting them into action. I love what Drew was saying, this idea, like I had an idea last night of like a coalition, right? But I love that district idea. But on the contractor and the builder side, right, Becky, you said, it's hard dealing with contractors. I'll be up here and I'll apologize for my industry. It's a tough industry. Labor is scarce. It's transient. Most of our workers don't know where their next job's going to be. It's a tough way to make a living. And margins are low, and the risk is high, and we're stuck doing things the way we've always done them, right? And so I'm up here today saying, how can we do something different? Just like Brad, how can the insurance company look at this differently, do something different? And then, Abby was speaking to this gap, right? This funding that we're looking to fund this gap to build back more resilient. Well, the contractors, it's no coincidence that I was the last one to call here, right? There's ideas, and then there's funding, and then there's how we're going to insure it, how we're going to develop. Oh, then we call the contractor, right? And he comes in at the end of the day and he messes everything up, right? Because I've done it like this, and my labor force knows how to do it like this, my suppliers know how to do it like this, and all the best laid plans get messed up. So to be here today and be part of these discussions is huge. I think that's the first step. But to your point, right? It's if it takes somebody that's delivering siding to the Palisades 2 hours to get from Santa Monica up the hill to the house they're going at, you've just blown your entire budget in that gap that we're trying to manage on how to.
Even that, the bid went up 25%.
Right. Yeah. So it's all about early involvement. Can we leverage this opportunity to bring in better training programs? Can we speak to some of those younger people that are willing to roll up their sleeves and come in and get trained on new building materials, new building processes? Look at taking some of this work, moving it off site, so that we're not bringing every single stick of material into the Palisades, into Altadena, but we're building, modular to the extent we can, to the extent it's architecturally pleasing, and it appeals to the people that are living in these areas, right? So, the name of the game today is bringing that builder in, that coalition of builders, working with the designers, understanding how we do this, right? And training our folks and bringing them along the way as we go, so that, once we get this great idea, once we get this great plan laid out, we don't bring in the builders and then it all goes out.
Let me stay with this modularity idea, because if I had the Sears Roebuck catalog from 1915, I could order it, right? And we could look at parts and I could hire somebody to put it together. And if that house today were built off-site, I don't have the same labor problems, because that basically now allowed a much wider shed or pool of labor potentially to be serving the communities, because they don't have to all physically come here, what they build would be brought here instead. So is there room for everybody? Is there room to imagine we use your USGBC Building Council guidelines, right? Abby, we use things that certify for insurability, so Brett, all those other insurance companies are all happy with it. Drew is within its pencils out, maybe it's affordable because we're benefiting, frankly, from some standardization. Low
3D print.
Can we get it?
You can 3D print.
Yeah, 3D print it. 3D print a house, get it done, drop it off. What does that do to your bid?
Well, I think the name of the game is certainty, right? We need to be able to look down the road and say, this plan that we're laying out, we're certain that it'll fall within this range of cost and schedule. And anything that we can do to componentize that or pre-print out that is always going to save time, and especially in this situation, money, right? Because it is going to be about getting those materials and that labor to that place where we're ultimately handing over those keys, right?
And then, Abby, does that lead into this kind of idea of bundling, right? Where we're bundling a certain design, materials, it's resilient, it's defensible, it's within the permitting or the building codes to require. And there's maybe a capital piece that can be brought in to make that affordable. Yeah. Does that sound good?
Yeah, the best time to make the decision to be resilient is when you're starting from scratch. So the more opportunity you have to integrate the process, integrate the financing, integrate the opportunities for how that works, I think will streamline the homeowner decision and then opens up the aperture for more community engagement as well. So, yeah.
I'll just add to that, I get very involved in construction projects, and when we have home that's finishing, whether we're insuring it or not, we're looking to find insurance for it at the end of the day. And normally we talk to the contractor towards the end of the project and say, we need X, Y, Z, then we need no mulch there, and we need fire alarm put in, and then the contractor said, well, we have 4 weeks left in this project, and you're asking me to do all these things that are delineated in 10 days. So instead, I should try to shift my mindset now to talk to clients as they're planning a project. Talk them into the planning phase. You just bought a lot. Let's start talking about what you're going to do. Let's start talking about what the trends are, not only with insurance, but with wildfire and how you can better protect your property. People keep buying in remote areas, and they're going to continue to live in the Palisades and build more communities in these buoy areas, and that's great. I'm all for it, but let's do it more wisely this time. There's science and engineering behind how we can survive and build in these communities, so we don't, when a fire passes through, it's not going to affect these homes and these properties anymore. So to have the conversation with the contractor at stage one when they're just planning it, I can't tell you how many times I talk to the contractor about, I'm so happy we had this conversation now. And we're not sitting here scrambling at the end of the day. It gives me time to prepare. I can then talk to the architect. I can then talk to the landscape architect. And we can have a plan where we can do this the right way so that it not only meets what clients have to think, but what the insurance companies want at the end of the day as well too. We're all asking for the same things. We're all trying to do the same things, just we're not talking to each other enough. So if you can get involved with your insurance company as you're rebuilding, have your builder involved, start talking to them about what the plan is to make the home more resilient, because I don't think every builder realizes what you can do to improve your house from a wildfire perspective. But if they do a little bit of research, building code drives some of it. If they do some research, and you do your research, and you can share what you've learned, you can change the mindset of these builders so they can implement that during construction as well.
Thanks.
Yeah, and so many things to dig into there, but I wanted to touch on something that Abby said, which is it's best to build in resiliency at the beginning when you start. And so this is not the time to roll back codes and regulations that are gonna make people forego that. Like that feels really defeating right now for the city, for the state, who's considering not to roll those things back now because we have the chance to build for the future. And we know that that's going to be required, whether it's 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, so why are we not gonna do that now? So that's one thing up front. And then to what Brad's saying, one of the visions that we have that so many people are working on are these sort of home templates. So we know that no one builder, no one manufacturer can handle the volume of the homes and structures that need to be rebuilt. So if each one could have, let's say, 5 plans that are for a variety of home situations that have the sustainability and resiliency built in, that can work with insurers to be pre-approved based on what they're doing and can be permitted, the permitting can be expedited, then communities can pick from these homes and everything can go a lot smoother. But this isn't gonna be one company doing it or 2 companies, it's going to be everybody that works in this market, prefab, traditional builders, everyone to get together. And there's gonna take a lot of alignment and not everybody's gonna wanna do that, but even if 20, 30% of the homes were rebuilt in this way, the sustainability impacts, the efficiency that this could happen, and the model that this could set for how we rebuild in the future could be really impactful.
Yeah, I would just want to add on and build on this conversation, and I think, Drew, I appreciate that you brought up the climate resilience districts or different names for them. We are working to build out a climate resilience district incubator to stand up resilience districts, but actually getting at a lot of what we've been talking about here across this panel. One of the things, 2 points here quick. One is why we're interested in the climate resilience districts is one, we think it has the potential to really help shift this conversation to something I mentioned earlier, which is we need sustained revenue streams to invest in resilience in the long term. Candidly, part of that is gonna have to come from a local tax base. So the climate resilience districts provide a structure to be able to do that and kind of the ability to then think about how do you crowd in additional capital in addition to public, tax base to be able to support this. But it needs that foundation and that sustained revenue. Because we also need to get to this place where we are not, to your point of the public sector can't do this alone. I think the public sector has a critical role to play and needs to be empowered and enabled to do many of the things that you were talking about. But we also collectively need to not assume the public sector and government is going to be the insurer and investor of last resort, because we are in a climate reality where that can no longer happen. And we're seeing real systemic breakdowns because of that assumption. So one of the other things, and Brad, you were talking about this, so like when people and partners are at the table really matters. So one of the things we're working to build as we're thinking about this resilience district incubator is we can't just make a bunch of public investments that reduce risk and assume those will be carried through the insurance sector, other financial, banks, lending entities. We actually need to have them at the table from the beginning to say, we are a local community, we want to make these investments. What information do you need, insurers, to make sure that this information is carried through your decision making? And where does that information need to come in your decision making process? And when do you need to be at the table? So we're really working to try to figure out how do we set this table and this collective table to make sure across, again, that value stream or value chain rather, we are actually aligning information where it needs to go towards this long-term outcome.
I want to throw it open for questions from the room. Before I do, I want to follow up on that point, and also, I guess, Drew, you mentioned Nuin-Tara, because one thing that comes to mind that works in areas that have suffered from disaster is the idea of not so much Belarus, but more tax increment financing, like we found in redevelopment areas. Because if you wait too long, you're not going to rebuild, and if you don't rebuild, the assessed valuations are significantly depressed for years. If you can accelerate that and then strip off the delta of the increased property tax that results from that and keep it local and use that to fund the recovery, maybe sell bonds against the future cash flows, that gives you kind of the best of both worlds. But then how do you apply that to making other areas more resilient that have not yet suffered the way Albany has?
you for all that, I know. I think you first I really do think you have to focus on the immediate fire affected areas. It's a massive undertaking, as I said earlier. There is no reference in California, and certainly in Southern California history for them. I really, and there's professionals here who really deal with it more directly than I do. I'm just a volunteer because I care. But if I were again back to the Monarch, I would solve for alternate and palisades, and perhaps that would give you a lens on how to take those strategies, techniques, protocols, conversations, dialogues to other fire-prone areas. This would be your template, because you have a lot of, there's urgency, there's human capital, there's financial capital for these two areas, right? Take those three elements and use that intellectual capital to apply to other areas as and when you discover how to deal with what we have right here, right now. I mean, that's the way I approach it, because otherwise, you're trying to solve a 50 variable equation, and I was never that good at that, so I'm going to stick with 2.
Thank you for that governance flexibility.
Yeah, I think the one thing I would add on is, I do think we need to continue, and I know we've all been talking about this, is thinking about the scale of the risk. And one of the things that we are really focused on is so I totally hear you in terms of focusing on the immediate need and the rebuilding and having that focus. Where I think we need to continue thinking though is in the long term, that risk shed of where the fire hit is not necessarily going to be where the fire comes next time. And we need to be thinking about at the scale of the risk to really manage that, and then be thinking about how we are doing it at kind of the right scale for the problem we're trying to solve. I don't think that has to come at the expense of and making everything too complicated in the moment for what communities need right now to rebuild. But I think if we're thinking about climate resilience districts and building that institutional capacity, it should be in context of, and what's the right geography to be managing risk, and then also, to your point, we can't just manage one risk at a time. We actually need to be thinking about multi-peril approaches. I think there's a staging and a sequencing of things that need to happen, but I don't think we are helping our long-term resilience if we are just trying to dealing with one problem in isolation.
And correlation. Let's get one of the mics if we could, which is Sean. And if I can ask you to maybe take some questions in the room, and what we'll do is I see a hand in the back, I see one in the front, we'll take like a bunch of questions, and then just ask a question, and then we'll respond to as many as we can.
And to key on the word that he said, which is question, there'll be a chance to share longer stories and stuff later on, but we're going to try and bring 3, 4, 5 questions. Allan will pose them, and then we'll keep moving. So quick, Isaac. And I'll repeat this. I know not everyone's going to be able to hear it, so I'll try and rephrase it. All right, so thoughts on electrification versus gas as we move forward? I'm going to take a couple questions. So all the way back.
When we talk about undergrounding, we haven't talked about the wireless, because wireless can't be undergrounded and they're essential to resiliency. Are there any plans to integrate wireless providers in resiliency efforts?
So speaking about wireless and other type of utility provisions that might not be solved by undergrounding, so some other ideas about utilities. Sir.
I'm from Denmark. So sustainability we've been doing for 50 years, building new beach projects very differently. Works very important with some of our stakeholders, not just from Denmark, but from Europe, over here. How can we help?
How can the wise Danes are rebuilding here? Did I get that right? All right, how can we learn from them? All right. I'm going to leave it with that one, and then we'll come back to more questions in a second.
I wouldn't think wise things is redundant. Yeah, there's one right in the front too.
Yes, sir.
My question on the issue of prevention and resiliency, while you're at it with the wildfire rebuilding, what about like earthquake? We're way overdue for a severe earthquake, not just individual foundation, but road ground and above ground infrastructure like water systems and utility. You know, you can get into making it more resilient below ground.
That's
Great question. And so,
one
we're gonna
thing-
go through those and then we'll come back to more questions in a minute.
Yeah, so it's actually on resiliency for earthquake risk and underground. I was talking to some engineers who had a wonderful example, which works in a third grade classroom. Take a shoebox, fill it halfway with some sand, and put some pipes, like don't glue them together, just a little pipe threads together underneath it, and then put some just on the surface of it, at the top of the sand, and then take some little toothpick towers and elevate some pipes. And when you shake the box, guess what happens? Right, so you can picture it. Certainly underground, you have advantages for size of fire. All right, so you heard a bunch of questions here. Who wants to shoot and answer that any or all?
I'll go first on the utilities. I think really all of this is about education and alignment. We have, and also advocacy. So we have to give people education to make the choice to go electric. We can't force people to do anything. People have, this is a really traumatic moment for people, and we don't want to shove things down their throat or make them feel like they don't have their options. But if we educate them in the right way, they will make the right choices. That's how we feel as an organization. So putting that out there, making the really compelling arguments that if you do what you can to decarbonize your home, then you are adding to the whole collective good of having to deal, hopefully, with less of these carbon disasters, and advocate for policies at the city and state level that push us towards more resilient and sustainable building in general. So it's a community push, it's being in alignment with partners and how we can educate and get everybody on the same page. Is really the way that we're approaching all of this. And please teach us, Danes, teach us what you've done over there. We would love to educate on what's happening, because you're great, thank you.
I will speak to the earthquake. I don't know utilities well. I can't speak to that, but from a homeowner perspective, I mean, as much as carriers look at the wildfires, they are looking at earthquake as well. I know you have to add that onto the policy as well in the endorsement, but there are new techniques to build homes besides just using sticks and bricks, if you will, that should be explored by people. There's insulated concrete form or ICF construction, which is actually a great technology that's been around 30 years, and not only is it wonderful for wildfire, but it's great for earthquake as well too. So I think we need to look at alternative methods that are more resilient too. ICF's a lot more resilient than a stick home that's built. We had an example of a home on the PCH where everything around burned. The house that survived was ICF construction. There were no vents on the house, it was concrete on the outside, and they also had the foundation going down several feet, or several hundred feet I should say. So for earthquake, it's built to be stable, it's built to last 100 plus years. So I think we need to look at different technologies to utilize as we rebuild too.
Education, critical, giving people decisions. We have a lot of the engineering solutions. I'm really focused on what are the incentives that align to make those things happen. So when you're making the choice, how do we incentivize the behavior to make the decision for resiliency, to make the decision to be more sustainable, to solve for multiple perils. So that's whether that's a individual homeowner, corporate or public finance. How do we integrate incentives so that we are thinking long term?
Let's make resiliency, sexy. Let's make it cool. Let's make it, part of HGTV. Have a house that's prepared for wildfire as they're building it. We need to make it more mainstream. I've been talking about wildfire and how to improve homes for 10 years, and even before the Palisades fire, I had a conversation with a client and gave him all the things he needed to do to improve his property in the wildfire, because he's currently on the fair plan looking to get a policy. He was with State Farm. And I just gave him all this advice, he's kind of half interested. The Palisades fire occurs that Friday, I get a phone call, and it's him. He says, do whatever it takes. I need you to tell me the guidance again, what I need to do, but I'll do whatever you tell me I need to do to improve my house so now I can survive. I think this is the event like Hurricane Andrew in 1995 with hurricanes that finally awakened people up to say, we need to do something because this is going to continue to happen. You can control your own destiny by making changes to your property. So hopefully this will continue, this trend will keep going.
And then we think about establishing trust for people who are gonna do anything you say. This is something that Najla was touching on, is how do we build trust across communities such that we know where to go and to be able to ask. All right, more questions?
I just want to touch on one thing that you said about innovative materials, like how do people have access to these materials? How do they know about the materials so they can get them? One of the initiatives we're working on, sort of in continuation of building this guide, is a materials marketplace. This is a big ask to the room because this is going to take a lot of collaboration. We already have the software platform up and running for this, but we're trying to get a materials marketplace going to make these materials accessible to everybody in these rebuilds. We need manufacturers and innovation coming in, and this is going to help in this rebuild, and this is going to help in the future for everybody who has to build anything to have access to these materials, to know what's new and cutting edge, to get innovation in there, and to bring that to scale so people can have better access to all these things that we really want them to be using instead of going back to the materials that we know, and then share that with our building colleagues so that they can adopt them, so that they understand and have the confidence in them, so that they want to use them too, and we create this ecosystem where that continues to happen.
One of the things that occurs to me when I hear this too is the benefit of aggregation, whether that's aggregate buying power for building materials that can then be used by multiple homeowners or multiple builders. Undergrounding. I was talking to someone from Southern California Edison, and they said, with respect to Altadena, if we can underground wires in the entire neighborhood all at once, especially when no one's living there because it's been partly destroyed, we can cut our cost of doing that by 80% and accelerate it by 7 years, as opposed to trying to get people individually, homeowner by homeowner, to say, hey, we have permission to go in your backyard, we need an easement, can you dig this up, and it takes forever. To the question in the back about telecommunications, right? Wireless local loop, fiber to homes, in streets. There are ways to do that that don't require anything other than the cell towers themselves, and obviously have to be elevated. They can be done at the same time as you're undergrounding other utilities, and you're only cutting the street once. There are things you can't do, but there are things that come from aggregating and doing things simultaneously that do help to co-locate some of those utilities. Lastly, to the Danish comment, I would say one thing that's different in California, we love to build with wood frames and stucco. In Europe, you don't do that. You build with brick, stone, hollow blocks, steel structures, glass, things, by the way, also don't burn. And that's the way we build houses here is very strange to a lot of people. And more good. That's right, and they don't require the same chemical treatments either inside the wood, for instance.
Right. The sign of a good panel is that if we are frustrated that we can't answer all of your questions. So right now, we want to take a bunch of questions. Some we'll be able to address, but because we're almost at the end of the hour, hopefully this will carry us off to conversation in a little bit. More questions. I'm going to start with you over there to the left. So engagement with nonprofit communities, thinking about the distinction between community level support and individual level support. Thank you. Now, this is my wife, so she gets to keep going. We have to. Nina will be able to help you with some more information about this counseling. Thank you, Nina. Other questions? Yeah. about complex systems, how do we engage the public health and the individual health level concerns that are engaged with this challenge? Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Hi. As it relates to the climate districts that you all are proposing or considering, I was wondering, are you guys considering also the equity piece as it relates to LTVs and the thought of having an additional property tax and or sales tax would be extremely burdensome? So have you all considered a county-wide measure that would then fund into each individual district and or allocate that?
Or statewide.
Thank you very much. How we integrate concepts of equity as we think about the communities that are quite diverse that are being challenged by this. Others are back. Yes, ma'am.
My question is specifically about like how are we making education sexy? I was a resilience consultant last year for the city of Boston, and a lot of people don't realize how hard community engagement is, as well as like working with nonprofit leaders, making sure that they have the proper information to spread down to the community. But also community members are just like fearful of course gentrification, smart cities, so like to adapt to these new ideas, it's kind of like daunting. So that's my question.
How do we engage with communities more effectively? The Department of Angels.
Sexy
This is
too,
The
not just.
entire reason you guys exist is to work on exactly that challenge. Great question. One more question, sir.
Wondering about the extent to which nature-based solutions are being factored into any of your thinking, and or in the inverse, if we're talking about utilities' impact on nature and doing mitigation on that.
How are we integrating this rebuild and resilience with the natural world in which we're inhabiting? Thank you very much.
Okay, my suggestion because these are great questions, I would like maybe a lightning response from each of you, picking maybe a different one. And we'll start with Drew and then with Nuin-Tara. And we've got environmental impacts and we've got education, all the things we just heard. Take it.
Jim Craver, the lightning round.
Yes.
On the inclusionary question regarding the district, once you create a district, you can create the confines in which you want that district to behave. So if it's a taxation issue and including various constituencies in that district, you address them at the time of creation. So for example, if you're talking about a school that was destroyed and it catered to a certain demography, that would be first and foremost, right? You would address that particular issue within taxation. And when I talked about revenue and taxes, I wasn't talking actually about increasing them. I was talking about reallocating them. So for example, if you buy a refrigerator within the Altadena, we'll call it the Altadena Fire District, that some of that tax to buy the refrigerator, all of it now goes elsewhere. What I'm suggesting is part of that goes back to your district for the benefit of that district. Does that answer your question, at least partially?
I'll answer the making resilience cool. There's this program called Case Study Adapt. Their founder Justin is here. They're partnering with 10 renowned architects to rebuild homes with resilience, and Architecture Digest is following the process. So really thinking about a new era of, the case study program in the 1950s made mid-century modern, synonymous with California architecture and culture. We have an opportunity right now.
Well, for years, Smokey the Bear said, only you can prevent forest fires. And all of us remember that from our childhoods, right? Start with kids. I think you gotta have kids bring it home to their parents, talk about resilience at the school level. There are ways you can improve, kids can go out and rake the mulch out of the beds. They can improve the house. You can help cut the plants out. I think you start with kids, educating them. This is Hollywood after all, right? Create stories that are designed towards kids, or have home design shows that are designed to show how it's cool to live in a wildfire area and make your house sustainable in a wildfire. Just some thoughts.
Ryan?
Yeah, I'll speak to the nonprofit and the economically disadvantaged, whether that's firm for people. There's no secret that the construction industry, the trade labor in our industry tends to be more economically disadvantaged. Our industry is very used to working with those people or those people that are looking to start a business, right? So there's great opportunities to work with these people, mentor them, help them start their own businesses, or, like Drew said, workforce housing. How are we incorporating diversity into the communities that we're building through workforce housing, or wouldn't it be great if some of those people that are building those communities back have a place in that community to live and to work and to raise their families? So we're fully on board with, in fact, we have those programs in place now, right? So is that, again, getting to that younger generation and from my blood, making construction sexy, making it an interesting and challenging career in the future where you can start a business, right? And there's so many different ways to do that.
Becky? From Denmark, one of the things they do so well in Europe is they have trade unions. And from an early age, it's okay to be an electrician, right? You shouldn't be studying French literature if you really are handy and that's your métier, that's what you want to be. So I think at a young age, to your point, I think we should bring more tradespeople up so we have bigger construction workers.
I like how you dropped your métier. This is actually.
I'm going to address the nonprofit and community engagement aspect. The alignment is really critical. If there's a lot of different organizations doing the same thing and not talking about it, we're really not going to get as far as if we align things together. So I've been so many coalition meetings, AAC coalition meeting, neighborhood meetings. There's so much going on right now, and that really has to flow through to somewhere. There's a Blue Ribbon Commission. There's all these different things. So if you work with a nonprofit that's working on this, please come talk to me. Please come talk to my colleague Eric, right in this front. That's really helping us put together a really dense list of resources. Our guide points to everything else we could find that's doing something that has more expertise than we do, that's going into a deep dive, that are really the professionals to talk to that. So it's gonna take a lot of alignment, a lot of conversations, and a lot of sharing so that we can all do what we do best. And the community engagement piece is huge. Nobody has better relationships with these communities than the organizations that have been there for years and decades, who know the people in the communities, who know what they need, and who know how to support them. So the private sector, the public sector, all of these bigger working pieces need to engage with those community organizations. We're doing our first community workshop in Pasadena for the Altadena and Pasadena communities tomorrow, and we're working with local nonprofits to engage with those community members so we can educate them on these solutions, so we can connect them with the professionals that they need. And we are going to do our next one in the Palisades with Resilient Palisades on May 10th. And we're gonna work with community groups in that community because we don't know what everybody needs. Only the groups that are already there on the ground know, so we need to really reach out and engage them and have them be a part of this conversation so that we can get everything done in the way that it needs to be done for everyone involved.
I just want to go back to the point and the question that was asked around making sure that across all of the things we've been talking about, we're driving towards equitable outcomes. And I think one of the things that, across all the things we've talked about, addressing climate and pricing climate into our economy means things are going to be more expensive along the way. What we have to make sure is that we are not just relying on existing structures and systems that have operated, that have cut off access to capital intentionally or institutionally over time, and that we're not just perpetuating that, because the worry that I have is that we set up, structures that bring in resilience to some communities but not others, and then those communities who already are struggling to access capital and resources are further cut out. And I would just end with the point that we will not be resilient if we are leaving communities behind, and that has to be central to what we do.
Super important point. First, thank you for your questions and your attention, but join me especially in thanking the panelists and the experts.